An innocent treat turned deadly, and someone wanted it to look like dessert. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. I love knowing where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments. You're a valued part of this circle. Now the mystery. It started, as these things often do, with baked goods and bad manners. I was on my third sip of coffee, and halfway through the crossword, when the doorbell rang, followed by the crisp triple knock that means Fritz was busy and our caller had a healthy ego. I laid down the pencil. A triple knock before 11 in the morning either means someone thinks they're important or they're trying to sell you religion. Either way, I had a professional interest. I opened the door to a woman. In cream wool and tension, she had that midtown polish, expensive coat, shoes that hadn't seen a puddle, and a purse that probably cost more than my week's salary. But her smile was brittle, her perfume too eager, and she was clutching a paper box like it held something. "Dangerous or divine?" "Mr. Goodwin," she asked. "That's me. I need to speak to Mr. Wolfe, please." People always think that's the hard part. It's not. The hard part is getting him to listen. I stepped back. "Come in, Ms. Devlin, Margot Devlin." We headed for the office. I could already tell she had something up her sleeve or in the box, and it wasn't just pastry. She sat on the red chair like it might bite her. Wolfe was, of course, in his chair, surrounded by the bulk of the morning's newsprint and the unmistakable aroma of sassafras tea, which he claimed clarified the mind. Personally, I thought it made the office smell like a health spa with poor ventilation. "Mr. Wolfe," I said. "We have her visitor, Margot Devlin," he grunted. "She brought a gift." That got his eyes off the editorial page. I pointed to the box. Miss Devlin opened it with the solemnity of a magician preparing to reveal a rabbit, or maybe a loaded pistol. Inside were turnovers, apricot, cherry, and one suspiciously pale one that might have been cream cheese. Fritz's standards are higher, but these looked good enough to raise eyebrows. "I own Devlin's," she said, "a bakery on 3rd Avenue. We do breakfast pastries, lunch, desserts. Artisanal but not pretentious, or at least that's the idea." Wolfe leaned back. "Miss Devlin, I am not a critic, nor am I a consultant on branding. If you are here to solicit endorsement or donation, you will be disappointed." "Mr. Goodwin, see her out." "It's not that," she said quickly. "It's about sabotage and secrets." Wolfe's eyelids didn't flicker, but I could practically feel the pause in his breathing. Sabotage was a word with flavor. "I believe someone is trying to destroy my business," she said, "and I think I know who, but if I confront them, I could ruin more than my bakery. I could destroy someone's future, possibly their life." I took the liberty of sitting. Wolfe hadn't told me to, but if this was about to get interesting, I wanted front row seating. "What form has this sabotage taken?" Wolfe asked. She hesitated, then said, "It started a month ago. A new batch of turnovers, apple cinnamon, were sent to a corporate catering client. Within 10 minutes of being served, half the staff had stomach cramps, nothing dangerous, just unpleasant. We traced it to a bad batch of cinnamon, except it wasn't bad when it left the kitchen. Someone tampered with it. Could it have been accidental? No. There have been 3 more incidents. A mousse with too much gelatin. Clients said it bounced. A sandwich with a sliver of wax paper left inside. And last week someone filed an anonymous health department complaint. We passed inspection, but barely." Wolfe grunted again, deeper this time. He was beginning to stir in that glacial, theoretical way of his, when the world outside the brownstone forced its way through his natural inertia. "And you have a suspect?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. She reached into her purse and pulled out a typed list. "Names, I took it. Everyone on that list works for me or has in the past year. I trust most of them, but someone is lying. And if I accuse the wrong person, it'll tear my kitchen apart. I've built Devlin's from the ground up. I can't afford a scandal, but I also can't stay silent." Wolfe took the list from me. and scanned it. He didn't raise his voice or make a grand statement. He simply said, "Leave the box, Miss Devlin. Mr. Goodwin will see you out. Return tomorrow at 6. She blinked. "That's it?" "For now," Wolfe said. "I do not undertake commissions lightly, but I am curious and in possession of pastries, Mr. Goodwin." She rose, still clutching the hope that maybe, just maybe, the great Nero Wolfe would save her bakery. When I came back from showing her out, Wolfe was still staring at the list. He tapped a name lightly with his finger, like someone testing. "Dough for doneness." I raised an eyebrow. "You're taking the case?" He nodded. "Yes. Why?" He glanced at the box. "Because betrayal in a kitchen is a moral affront. And because, Archie, I do not care to eat turnovers made with treachery." I grinned. The game, as they say, was officially afoot. And this one smelled like cinnamon and conspiracy. By the time I got back from walking Miss Devlin to the door, where she thanked me twice and apologized once for just showing up like that, Wolfe was already halfway through the apricot turnover. That may not sound like much, but for Wolfe to engage with baked goods from an unvetted source before Fritz had performed his customary forensic dissection meant something had definitely piqued his interest. He set the pastry down with a small, deliberate motion and glanced at the list again. "Archie." "Yes, sir?" "Call Saul. I'll need him to make a few unobtrusive inquiries by tomorrow morning. Nothing invasive. Just a brief sketch of our list here. Begin with the sous chef, the pastry assistant, and the delivery driver." I took the list and scanned. The names. There were 12 in total, kitchen staff, counter help, one ex-employee marked with asterisks. I mentally filed the details. "You think it's internal?" Naturally. Wolfe reached for a napkin and dabbed the corner of his mouth. "No external party would have both access and the knowledge necessary to execute such finely targeted irritants. These acts are not amateur. They are deliberate, subtle, and intended to erode rather than explode." I nodded. "You think they're trying to sabotage Devlin personally or just the bakery?" "That, Mr. Goodwin, is what you will determine. Go there, see the place, taste the atmosphere, ask questions, ask them well." I stood, grabbing my coat from the rack. "What's my angle?" "You are scouting for a client. Be circumspect. Do not announce our involvement unless unavoidable." "Got it." I paused. "You want Fritz to taste the turnovers?" "No. I shall suffer alone for now." That was Wolfe's version of bravery, and it told me everything I needed to know about how seriously he was taking this pastry-based plot. By 11:30, I was stepping into Devlin's bakery. The place was airy, white-tiled, and smelled like it was winning the war on carbs. There were 2 glass counters, one full of golden pastries and another with cold sandwiches and delicate-looking salads that probably sold for $9 a leaf. The clientele was a mix of hurried office types, stroller moms and 2 elderly women splitting a lemon tart with surgical precision. Behind the counter stood a tall kid with a man bun and the defeated look of someone who had been dealing with the public for too long on too little caffeine. I ordered a coffee and a cherry turnover, strictly professional research, of course, and watched the kitchen door swing open behind him every couple of minutes as trays were swapped and refilled. I wandered near a corkboard listing the weekly specials, keeping my ears open. No buzz, no whispers, no suspicious tension, just the low hum of a New York lunch rush and the clink of forks against delicate ceramic. I leaned casually against the counter when the kid brought over my coffee. "Busy place," I said. He nodded. "Always like this. Been nuts since we got featured in that Underground Eats blog last fall. Now the line's out the door on Saturdays." I took a sip of the coffee. "Good. Not Wolfe good, but respectable." "You been here long?" 7 months. He blinked. "You looking for a job or something?" "Thinking about opening a spot like this in Midtown. Checking out the competition. Seeing how things run." "You like it here?" He shrugged. "It's a job. Owners are decent. Chef Ricky runs the back. He's got a temper but knows his stuff. Margot's in and out. Kinda tense lately. I took a bite of the turnover. It was light, flaky, and just sweet enough. No sabotage here. How tense? Just edge-of-her-seat stuff. Jumps at noises, real private phone calls, you know. He glanced toward the back as if someone might be watching. And she fired this guy last month. Delivery dude. Said he was sloppy, but I don't know. He'd been around since before I started. That matched the name with the asterisk on her list. Quincy? Yeah, Quincy Trapp. Had a busted kneecap or something. Used to limp. Real quiet. That gave me more than a few crumbs to follow. I finished the turnover, left a tip, and stepped out onto the sidewalk just as a sleek silver sedan double-parked in front of the shop. Margot Devlin climbed out, her sunglasses large enough to suggest a hangover or a disguise. She spotted me immediately. "Mr. Goodwin?" "Just doing some reconnaissance," I said. "Coffee's decent, pastry's better." She looked nervous but not surprised. "You didn't say you were coming today." "That's because I didn't. No, until 10 minutes ago. Wolfe's very spontaneous when properly motivated." She opened the bakery door but turned back before stepping inside. "If you learn anything at all, I want to know. Even if it's bad, especially if it's bad." "I'll hold you to that," I said. Back at the brownstone, I delivered my report over lunch. Fritz had made trout mousse with tarragon, which Wolfe consumed with ritual focus, while I recounted the decor, the clientele, and the mention of Quincy Trapp. Wolfe's brow lifted slightly. Trapp. Apt. He's the only one fired recently. That always earns a suspect badge. Indeed. Wolfe pushed his plate away. "Call Saul. I want a full run on Mr. Trapp. And then I want you to revisit the establishment, speak with the sous chef, Ricky, is it? Secure his impressions." "What am I looking for?" Wolfe closed his eyes. Pride, fear, resentment, or the absence of all three. The saboteur is not driven by money. They are enacting vengeance or staking a claim. But they are doing so with surgical precision. This is not chaos. It is culinary strategy. That sounded like Wolfe's version of war. And if he was sharpening his cutlery, someone in that kitchen had better start sweating. Tomorrow I'd be back at Devlin's, but not for coffee, for answers. The next morning, I rolled into Devlin's at precisely 10:48, just ahead of the mid-morning lull. The same counter kid from the day before gave me a faint nod, which I returned with the subtlety of a government operative, and I positioned myself by a wall display of eco-friendly cookie tins, waiting for Ricky the sous chef to surface. It took 8 minutes and 30 seconds, give or take a flick of cinnamon, before the kitchen door swung open and a compact man in chef white strode out with the body language of a storm cloud. No doubt about it, this was Ricky. He had a permanent scowl and the kind of neck you associate with welterweight boxers. His sleeves were rolled, and a thin sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead, as if his oven ran a few degrees above hell. I intercepted him just as he turned toward the counter to bark instructions. "Ricky, got a minute?" He paused, looked me up and down, and narrowed his eyes. "Depends. Who's asking?" "Name's Archie Goodwin. I'm scouting talent. Considering. Opening a place of my own. You've got a reputation. I'd rather hear from the man himself." That was bait. Not the kind you toss in the water to see if anything bites, but the kind you lay on a silver tray and cover with a flourish. His scowl shifted. Suspicion blended with the faintest gleam of ego. "Chef Devlin's the one you want for that sort of thing. She handles hiring and handshakes." "Sure," I said smoothly, "but she's also got a lot on her plate right now. Thought you might have some insight into what makes this place tick and what happens when it skips a beat." That landed harder than a dropped souffle. He folded his arms. "You looking for gossip?" "Just competence." And maybe a little context. He jerked his chin toward a two-seater table in the corner. 5 minutes, no more. We sat and he didn't waste time. You want to know what's going on here, Mr. Goodwin? I'll tell you. Someone in that kitchen's playing games. Wasting product, messing with procedure, making us look bad in ways you don't spot until it's too late. That's not just kitchen drama. He shook his head. Devlin's runs tight. We're not a diner. We prep in grams, not guesses. You taste everything, you test, then test again. These screw-ups, not mistakes. Somebody's trying to make us look like clowns. Why? He hesitated. Could be jealousy. Devlin's got the name, the vision, the press. Some of the old-timers think she's selling out. Too much polish, not enough grit. One of them said that to her face once. Who? Guy named Matteo used to do breads. Walked out in January after a blow-up over the focaccia schedule. Is he on the list? Doubt it. She wouldn't want Wolfe knowing about him. Makes her look sloppy. That said something about trust, or the lack of it. I took a mental note and changed gears. What about Quincy Trapp? Ricky's face flattened. Ah, him. Care to elaborate? He was solid, not flashy, but he got the job done. Then things started going missing. Shortages, misdeliveries. Devlin swore. It was his fault, I wasn't so sure. Why not? Because he wasn't stupid, and he wasn't sloppy. And he didn't talk much, but he listened like a hawk. My gut said he knew something. And now? Now he's gone. No forwarding address, no calls. Just vanished. He glanced toward the kitchen as a bell rang, signaling another round of prep. I've said too much. You want answers? Watch the kitchen. Everyone smiles out here. It's the knives behind the curtain that matter. He stood and returned to the back like a man expecting fire. That evening, back at the brownstone, Wolfe was reclining in his chair, with the posture of a man prepared to dismember civilization, using only logic and a footstool. Report, he said. I gave it to him straight. Ricky smelled smoke. Matteo, the ghost of focaccia past, hadn't made Devlin's list. Quincy had disappeared faster than a soufflé in a wind tunnel, and everyone in the bakery was either too calm or too careful. Wolfe pressed his fingertips together. It is unfolding. That it is. Slowly. As it must. Call Saul. Tell him to find this Matteo, quietly. I want employment records, addresses, and any recent financial duress. If Miss Devlin omitted him, she did so with purpose. Maybe she thought he was irrelevant. Wolfe's eyes opened half, an inch wider. There is no irrelevance in betrayal. Omission is always a signal. He stood, which for Wolfe is like watching the tides reverse. I'm going to the plant rooms. Tell Fritz I will dine at 8. Anything special? Something. With restraint. I have no appetite for abundance tonight. Too many flavors compete. I watched him ascend the stairs with the pace of a monarch returning to his garden, and I was left to make the call to Saul and to wonder just how many knives were out in Devlin's bakery, and who exactly they were pointed at. Saul Panzer called the next morning at precisely 8:06, which meant he'd either worked through the night or skipped sleep altogether. Given that Saul's idea of rest was reading microfiche files for fun, I didn't bother asking which. I've got Matteo, he said. Matteo Quinlan, 37, pastry specialist, trained at Le Monde Culinaire in Lyon. Bounced through 6 boutique bakeries before landing at Devlin's 2 years ago. Quit or was fired 3 months back. He's currently working freelance out of a shared kitchen in Queens. Started an Instagram page. He calls his brand Feral Flour. Feral? I repeated. Yeah. Picture sourdough with a manifesto. What? Else? He's behind on rent, fighting with his ex over a vintage espresso machine, and filed a Better Business Bureau complaint against Devlin's 2 weeks ago. Claimed she stole a recipe. A very specific turnover dough, apparently. Bingo. That's good work, Sol. I'm not done, he said as if insulted. Devlin's didn't respond to the complaint, but I did a backtrace on a burner phone used to send an anonymous tip to the health department. That phone pinged a tower 3 blocks from Mateo's, addressed the night the call was placed. Coincidence? Could be. But in my experience, people who get fired and start bakeries called Feral Flour tend to hold grudges. I thanked him, scribbled notes, and headed into the office. Wolfe was already there, seated at his desk with an open volume of Plutarch and a breakfast tray that featured poached eggs, a fresh croissant, and the kind of tea that costs more per ounce than gasoline. Report, he said without looking. Up, Mateo Quinlan. He's running a one-man rebellion out in Queens and lobbing grenades from afar. Filed a complaint, possibly sent the tip, and claims Devlin stole a recipe. Wolfe closed his book. Which she may have. She might have, yes. Doesn't change the fact that someone's actively sabotaging her kitchen. Unless, Wolfe said slowly, that someone is not in the kitchen. He reached for a croissant. Consider the implications, Archie. If Mr. Quinlan is acting from outside, the acts must be carried out through a proxy. Who would he trust with his vendetta? Who has access? And, this is crucial, who benefits? That's 3 questions before breakfast, I said. I should charge extra. Wolfe scowled, which meant he was warming to the theory. He gestured toward the client list. Return to Devlin's, he said. Engage Miss Devlin directly. Confront her with the existence of the omitted employee. Observe her reaction. Then speak again with Ricky and the front counter boy. I want stress fractures, I want fear. Someone is under pressure and they will show it. They always do. Anything else? Yes. Stop at Rusterman's and acquire a strudel. Apple. No cinnamon. You're punishing cinnamon now? I am temporarily abstaining from it, which, in Wolfe speak, was about as serious as declaring war. Devlin was in her office when I arrived at the bakery, a glass cubicle behind the kitchen, flanked by a wall of dried herbs and a poster of Julia Child holding a meat cleaver. She stood when I entered and looked like she hadn't slept. Her hair was twisted into a bun with the precision of a pastry swirl, but her eyes were bruised with fatigue. You found something, she said, skipping pleasantries. I found someone. Mateo Quinlan. Her mouth tightened. I see. That name didn't appear on your original list. No. It didn't. I waited. When silence stretched out like overproof dough, I stepped closer. He says you stole a recipe. He filed a complaint. And he may have sent the anonymous tip to the health department. Her eyes met mine then, and I saw it. The flicker of something hot and sharp under the surface. Not guilt, fury. I created that recipe, she said. We worked together on dozens of bakes, but that dough, that was mine. He called it soggy. Nonsense the first time I tried it. 2 weeks later, he's claiming it was his. Did you two argue? We argued constantly. He thought I was turning the bakery into a brand. I told him he was acting like an underground martyr with no oven mitts. He quit the same day he threw a pan of biscuits at the wall and stormed out. Dramatic. Mateo was always dramatic. He thought artisan baking was a crusade. I think it's a business. That makes me the villain in his little myth. Any chance someone here is helping him? She stiffened. No, not even Ricky. Ricky hated him. Not the delivery boy. He barely spoke to anyone, but even if they were friends, no, it's not possible. Miss Devlin, I said, someone here is leaking. Mateo may be the voice, but someone's delivering the echo. She slumped into her chair and looked away. I can't accuse people without proof, not in this business. If I ruin someone's career and I'm wrong, then let Wolfe be the one to do it. She gave a bitter smile. He'd enjoy that, wouldn't he? He'd enjoy being right. I left her to stew in her office and headed for the kitchen. Ricky wasn't at his station. But the counter boy, whose name I'd finally gotten as Glenn, was refilling the lemon tarts. "Hey," I said, "mind if I ask you one more thing?" He looked like he minded, but nodded. "You ever hear Mateo's name come up?" "Ex-employee. Intense guy, facial hair like a twisted brush." "Mateo," he said slowly. "Yeah, sure. He used to come around sometimes, like after he left." "Come around how?" "Just outside. He'd stand by the delivery entrance. Said he was picking up stuff from an old buddy." "Which buddy?" he shrugged. "Didn't say, but I saw him talking to Quincy once, before he got fired." I gave Glenn a pat on the shoulder, left $1 in the tip jar, and walked straight back to the brownstone. Wolfe was in the dining room finishing his strudel when I walked in and dropped the bomb. Mateo and Quincy were tight. Mateo showed up post-firing, loitered at the delivery entrance, talked to Quincy, and now Quincy's gone. Wolfe dabbed his lips. "Then we are closing in." "You think Quincy's the link?" "No. I think Quincy was the tool. The link is someone still inside." He pushed his plate away and settled into his chair, hands steepled. "Tomorrow, Mr. Goodwin, we will begin to press. Invite Miss Devlin and her staff, those on her list, here to my office, and we shall see who crumbles." The next afternoon, the brownstone was under siege. Not the type with torches and pitchforks, though if you've never seen a professional baker, when someone questions their technique, you'd be surprised how close that comes. At precisely 5 minutes before 6, the bell rang, and I began ushering them in one by one. Devlin arrived first, punctual and polished, wearing black slacks and a blouse the color of fresh lemon curd. Her expression was cool, guarded, and she carried the faint air of someone preparing to walk into a deposition. Next came Ricky, sleeves rolled, eyes sharp, jaw tighter than a rolled pastry shell. He nodded to me, offered a curt "Goodwin," and took a seat in the red chair by the window, like it was his regular booth. Behind him shuffled in Glenn, the counter boy, looking less like a suspect and more like a high schooler mistakenly cast in a noir drama. He gripped the arms of his chair like it might float away. Then came Paula, short, neat, freckled. She handled inventory and scheduling, and I'd only seen her once in passing, but she had the quiet calm of someone who was always 2 spreadsheets, head of disaster. Finally, the last seat went to a lanky guy with bad posture and sharp eyes named Leo, a night prep worker who specialized in refrigeration and pastry fillings. He said nothing and gave Wolfe a look like he was trying to memorize the upholstery pattern. Wolfe, of course, had not risen. He never does. He sat behind his desk, a silent force of gravity in the room, steepling his fingers and scanning each face as if cross-referencing them with a private ledger. I stayed standing off to the side, pen in hand, pad ready. "Thank you for coming," Wolfe said. "I assure you I detest meetings. I find them inefficient and often indulgent. But we are here because one of you is perpetrating acts of sabotage at Devlin's bakery. Deliberate, strategic, and increasingly reckless acts." Glenn swallowed audibly. "No one is being accused yet, but I intend to make my determinations this evening. If any of you would like to admit to knowledge of these incidents before I begin my inquiries, now is the time." Silence. "Very well." Wolfe turned to Devlin. "Miss Devlin, tell your staff what you told me, every incident, briefly." She did. The poisoned cinnamon, the gelatin mousse, the wax paper, the anonymous tip. She spoke clearly, but her voice shook when she described the damage done to the bakery's reputation and how much of her savings she'd poured in to keep it afloat. Wolfe nodded. "Thank you. Now, Mr. Ricky Darnell." Ricky's brow furrowed. "Yeah?" "You are the sous chef. You manage the back of house. Why have you not identified the saboteur?" "Because we've all been running damage control. Because whoever it is, they know what they're doing and when we're not looking. And because it would reflect poorly on you if the problem emerged under your nose." He bristled. "I care about that kitchen more than anyone. You think I'd let someone Screw with it? I think pride clouds judgment, Wolfe said, and fear delays action. Tell me, are you in communication with Matteo Quinlan? No. His answer was swift. Never liked the guy, arrogant, sloppy. Did you know he was visiting the back door after hours? Ricky looked to Devlin, who said nothing. No, he said slowly. No, I didn't. Wolfe turned to Glenn. You saw Matteo speak with Quincy Trapp. The kid looked like he wanted to slide under his seat. Yeah, once, maybe twice. They talked outside. I didn't think anything of it. Did anyone else speak with Matteo? Did he ever give you something to bring inside? Glenn shook his head like a bobblehead on a speed bump. No, sir, nothing. I barely talked to him. Wolfe stared at him another second, then moved on. Miss Paula. She lifted her chin. Yes? You manage inventory. Are you aware of any discrepancies that cannot be explained by standard waste or error? Her eyes narrowed. I log everything. The cinnamon issue bothered me. I reported it, but I wasn't told to investigate it further. Who did you report it to? Chef Ricky, she said. And Miss Devlin. Wolfe nodded, then turned his gaze to Leo. Mr. Baez, you work nights? Leo gave a small nod. I prep fillings, mousse bases, do restock and clean. Have you ever seen signs of tampering? He shrugged. I find stuff out of place sometimes. Missing prep notes, a pastry box moved. I chalked it up to laziness. Or misdirection. Leo didn't reply. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again with purpose. His voice grew quieter. Here is what I believe. Matteo Quinlan is the mind behind the operation. But the hand is here. A sharp breath passed through the room like a breeze across broken glass. Wolfe looked at Paula. You. Keep the logs. You notice every misstep. You knew the sabotage wasn't random and you said nothing. Her jaw tightened. Because you were tired of being ignored. Of watching Devlin and Ricky bicker like reality show contestants while you handled the details. Matteo saw that. Maybe he was kind to you. Maybe he promised you a partnership or respect. So you began small, a substitution here, a slight over-gel. That's ridiculous, she snapped. Wolfe continued, implacable. But something went wrong. Quincy Trapp got nervous. He confronted you. You dismissed him, but he went to Matteo. That forced you to escalate. The health complaint was a warning to Devlin. Back off, or the bakery suffers. Paula's face had turned red. You have no proof. No, Wolfe said, but Archie does. I stepped forward, holding up a printed email forwarded by Saul an hour before. 2 days ago, a transfer was made from Matteo's business account, Feral Flour, to a PayPal address registered under your name, a consulting fee, for advice on expanding the brand. Funny thing is, the PayPal account has the same email you use for your Instacart. Paula stood suddenly, fists clenched. You think I wanted to destroy Devlin's? I built half its systems. I made that place work. And when you weren't recognized, Wolfe said softly, you decided to make it fall apart without you. Silence. Then finally Devlin spoke. Call the police, Archie. But Wolfe shook his head. No. She won't contest this. She knows better. Paula sat back down, hard, like the fight had drained out of her. Wolfe, satisfied, leaned back. The yeast has risen and collapsed. I escorted them out one by one. Devlin thanked me. Ricky looked shaken. Glenn just looked grateful to escape. Back inside, Wolfe poured himself a beer and raised it slightly. Sabotage is a dish best served with subtlety, Archie, but arrogance is always the garnish. I nodded. And you've got the recipe, he grunted. Dinner was roast duck with orange glaze, and no cinnamon. The morning after Wolfe served his 5-course deconstruction of Paula's motive, method, and emotional instability, I found myself reflecting on just how fast the frosting can peel off the cake once you cut into it. Paula hadn't said another word after Wolfe laid it all out. Not a denial, not a protest, just that one explosive bark and then silence, the kind that means a mind is busy calculating the damage. Devlin hadn't pressed charges. She'd taken Wolfe's cue and opted for silence, at least for now. Public. Scandal would draw flies to the bakery, and not the metaphorical kind. She'd probably give Paula time to slink away into some other spreadsheet-filled cave and pretend it never happened. That's what people do when pride outpaces principle. But the case wasn't quite finished. Because we still didn't know what had happened to Quincy Trapp. Wolfe didn't like unresolved strands. He could forgive the occasional unanswered question, if it was philosophical or French, but not if it pertained to events inside his investigation. And since Saul hadn't been able to shake the trees hard enough to find Quincy in the usual boroughs, I was now en route to Queens to pay a little visit to Matteo Quinlan and his artisanal rebel hideout. The address Saul had provided led me to a converted warehouse next to a graffiti mural of a crocodile eating a subway train. Matteo's shared kitchen space looked like something out of a startup pitch deck. Stainless steel counters, exposed brick, and a motivational quote painted on the wall. Rise like dough. I found him elbow-deep in rye flour, shaping something that looked like it might sprout a thesis. He looked up, squinted, and then smiled with the kind of ease that comes from knowing you're not in jail. Yet. You must be the muscle, he said. Wolfe sends you when he wants to rattle a few pans? I'm not here to rattle anything unless you make me. I leaned on the counter. We nailed Paula. Thanks for the help. Though you really should have picked a better code name for that money transfer. He shrugged. Guilty of bad accounting. But I didn't sabotage anything. She came to me, said she wanted a future. I gave her one. With a side of blackmail. He dusted flour from his hands and gestured to a bench. Sit if you're going to accuse. I talk better when no one's looming. I sat but didn't let the edge come off. Where's Quincy Trapp? The shift in his face was subtle, but real. Not panic. Something closer to regret. I don't know, he said. Last time I saw him he was scared. Told me he thought someone was setting him up to take the fall. That he'd noticed prep orders being altered, ingredients swapped in the logs. I told him to keep quiet, that we'd figure it out. Big. Mistake. Yeah. Matteo exhaled. He disappeared 2 days after that. I've tried calling. Nothing. I think Paula spooked him, or worse. I leaned in. Define worse. She was careful, but intense, controlling, obsessed with getting credit. When she realized he might be the loose end, she could have done what? Scared him off, threatened him. I don't know. Matteo's fingers tapped the steel counter. But I do know she had access to his file before he left, including his emergency contact. Family? Only a sister. Lives in upstate New York. She called me last week asking if I knew where he'd gone. Said he stopped replying. I told her I hadn't seen him, which was true. I made a mental note. Got her number? He nodded and scribbled it down. If you find him, tell him I didn't sell him out. I left Matteo to his crusty revolution and called the sister on the way back to Manhattan. Her name was Jen Trapp. Sweet voice, worried tone. She said Quincy had called her the day before he vanished. Said he'd been spooked. Someone had left. A note on his bike outside the bakery. Just a slip of paper with one word, quiet. Did he say who he thought it was from? I asked. No. He just said, it's not safe anymore. Then he said he'd be gone a few days. I haven't heard from him since. Do you think he would have gone off the grid? Only if he thought someone might come after him. She hesitated. He used to keep a backup phone for emergencies. He never told me where it was, but if he's really scared, he might call from it. I asked her to call me immediately, if she heard anything, then hung up and headed back to the brownstone. Wolfe was in his chair, of course, nursing a beer and reading The Lives of the Caesars. The room was quiet, except for the faint clink of glass on wood when he set his bottle. "Down you have an expression," he said. "I don't like it." Paula was trying to tie up loose ends. Quincy Trapp was the string. He's not answering calls. His sister got one panicked voicemail, and then silence. "That is unacceptable." Wolfe sat forward. "Saul must resume. Do the search. Intensify it. He already is. But if Paula frightened him, he might not come out of hiding, not unless someone convinces him the coast is clear." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Which you propose to do?" I nodded. "We issue a statement to the sister, through Matteo, that Paula has been disarmed and that we need Quincy's testimony for closure, not prosecution." Wolfe grunted. "You trust Matteo?" "Only as far as I can throw a Danish, but I trust fear, and Quincy's afraid of the wrong people." Wolfe tapped his fingers together. "Do it. And Archie, when Mr. Trapp is found, bring him here. I will hear his account directly." That night I placed the call to Matteo. He agreed to be the middleman, and 2 days later, Quincy Trapp walked through the front door of the brownstone like a man just learning to breathe again. He was thin, pale, and wore a backpack like it contained the Ark of the Covenant. Wolfe didn't rise, but he did incline, his head slightly. That for him was the red carpet. "Mr. Trapp," he said, "you are safe here. You will speak freely, and then we will decide whether justice requires one more turn of the screw." I closed the door behind him. Wolfe had almost everything he needed. All that remained was the voice of the man who'd vanished into fear and was finally ready to speak. Quincy Trapp sat stiffly on the edge of the red armchair, like he expected it to bite him. He clutched his backpack in both hands, eyes flicking, from Wolfe to me and back again, taking in the room like a man not used to quiet that didn't mean danger. He looked as if the past week had wrung him out. His jacket was 2 sizes too large, and his face had the paper-thin look of someone who'd been living on vending machine crackers and side streets. "Mr. Trapp," Wolfe said evenly, "you need not fear Miss Paula any longer. Her involvement is known, her actions exposed. I have no intention of prosecuting you, but I require the truth." Quincy nodded barely. "You were present during several of the acts of sabotage at Devlin's. You were aware they were happening, and yet you said nothing." "I didn't know for sure at first," he said, his voice soft but steady. "Little. Things seemed off. Deliveries wrong, prep instructions changed. Ricky blamed me for a few of them. Said I was screwing up on purpose. I wasn't." "You suspected someone else," Wolfe said. "Yeah." I started noticing how Paula was always the one who found the mistakes, always before anyone else, always with a fix ready like she knew in advance. "She does strike one as prematurely efficient," I said, taking a seat by the bookshelf. Quincy managed the ghost of a smile. I kept quiet, tried to double-check everything. One night I saw her in the back, way past her shift, near the dry storage where we keep the spice blends. She said she was just reorganizing, but the next morning that cinnamon mix went out. Wolfe nodded once. "And you told Matteo Quinlan?" "Yes, I knew they'd work together. I figured maybe he'd know what to do." "What did he say?" "That I was right to be careful. That Paula was smart, but that she was playing a long game. He said he'd talk to her. That maybe he could get her to stop before she did something worse." "That was idealistic," Wolfe murmured. Quincy lowered his head. "A couple days later, there was a note on my bike. Just one word. Quiet. Then my locker was trashed. Nothing stolen, just everything dumped out like a warning. I figured I'd be blamed next, so I left." "You vanished," I said. He nodded. "I slept in the train station. A friend owed me a favor in Long Island City. Had a cot in his print shop. I didn't want to go to the cops. I didn't know if they'd believe me. I've got a record from when I was a teenager. Dumb stuff, nothing violent, but—" Wolfe raised a hand. Mr. Trapp, you are not on trial. Your instincts were sound. But now I require confirmation. Did you ever witness Paula altering materials herself? Not just circumstantial suspicion, but direct action. Quincy hesitated, then nodded. Yes. One night I came in early. Couldn't sleep. Figured I'd get a head start. She didn't see me. She was pouring something into the apple puree batch. Not a lot. Just a little bottle from her bag. When she saw me, she acted like she'd been cleaning. I didn't say anything, but that was when I knew. Wolfe's eyes closed briefly, then opened. That will suffice. You've done your part. Quincy looked at him, still gripping the backpack. What happens now? You return to your sister. You rest. And if Miss Devlin contacts you again, you may direct her to me. I walked him to the door. Outside, the late afternoon air was thick, with city heat and the hum of taxis on 35th Street. Quincy paused on the stoop. I didn't want any of this, he said quietly. Nobody ever does, I replied. But not wanting trouble doesn't keep it from finding you. You handled it. He gave a weak nod and disappeared down the steps. When I got back inside, Wolfe was already back in his chair, brow lowered in meditation. Well, I asked. He told the truth. You're sure? Yes. I waited for him to expand, but Wolfe was in one of his post-revelation silences, the kind where his mind tightens the final ribbon around the case. I poured us both a glass of Madeira. Wolfe took his, sipped, and then finally spoke. Devlin will recover, he said. She will replace Paula, rebuild, likely change suppliers and retrain her night staff. The sabotage has ended, the bakery will survive, and Paula will slink off into anonymous mediocrity. But something still irks me. Only one thing. He ignored me. Why now? Why did Paula act this year, this month, in this way? The betrayal. It was careful, yes, but the timing erratic. Matteo said she came to him. Maybe she'd been harboring the resentment for a while. Finally cracked. Perhaps. Wolfe set down the glass. But I suspect Matteo planted the seed. I straightened. You think he manipulated her? Certainly. Not directly. But his presence, his attention, his validation may have coaxed her into it. She was already discontent. He simply shined a light on it. And you're letting him walk? Yes, Wolfe said, because his hands were clean. Temptation is not a crime. He looked at me, eyes sharp. Execution is. I leaned back and whistled. Remind me never to make you angry, boss. He snorted. You've done so regularly for years. Dinner that night was rabbit braised in wine with creamed potatoes and buttered leeks. No cinnamon, no drama, just Fritz's quiet culinary restoration of order. Wolfe ate in silence, absorbed in his thoughts, while I made a few notes in the office log: case closed, crisis averted, bakery stabilized. As the dishes were cleared and Fritz disappeared into the kitchen, Wolfe leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. Apple turnovers, he said softly. Such a charming device. Sweet on the outside, hollowed at the center, and, if corrupted, capable of much mischief. I raised my glass. To turnovers, then. To human folly, Wolfe corrected. And that, as always, was the last word of the night. The next morning brought two things: a hand-delivered envelope from Devlin's bakery, and an unseasonable drizzle that turned West 35th into a canvas of glistening asphalt and irritable cabbies. I found the envelope tucked into the iron grill of our front door at 7:42 a.m., which meant someone had dropped it off before Wolfe's orchids were due for their weekly misting. No small feat. It wasn't heavy, but it was real paper, ivory stock, handwritten in dark blue ink. Mr. Wolfe and Mr. Goodwin, with thanks. Inside was a note from Margot Devlin. Mr. Wolfe, the matter is resolved. Quietly, as I'd hoped. You were right. About Paula, about everything. She resigned yesterday morning. No statement, no drama. Just a resignation letter and the keys to the dry goods cage. Ricky has taken over operations for now. We'll see how long he lasts before he frightens the espresso machine into quitting. As for Mr. Trapp, he's safe and his name has been cleared. I'm arranging a small bonus from the bakery's emergency fund. He deserves more, but it's a start, I imagine. You don't accept thank you notes. I'm sending one anyway. You may ignore it if it offends your sense of economy. Yours, Margot Devlin. I brought it into the office where Wolfe was already seated behind his desk with his breakfast, soft-boiled eggs, an artichoke heart on toast, and a silver pot of sassafras tea. He took the note with his fingertips, read it once, then laid it beside the Times like it was a mildly interesting botanical clipping. Miss Devlin is intelligent, he said, and has the good sense to be brief. Should I frame it or just pin it next to the unpaid invoices? Wolfe gave me a look. A thank you is not currency, but it has nutritional value. That was about as close to sentiment as he'd get before lunch. I settled into my chair and leaned back. Case is closed then. All villains unmasked, motives logged, and pastries decontaminated. Wolfe murmured. And yet. There. It was the Wolfe and yet, the dreaded phrase that meant something had caught in the gears of his logic mill and refused to be ground into closure. What's the yet about? I asked. Wolfe pushed his teacup away slightly. Miss Devlin's note thanks us for resolving the matter. It does not express regret for omitting Matteo Quinlan from her initial disclosure. That omission was not minor. It was the key to the entire affair. I nodded. She was embarrassed, or she didn't want to expose a messy staff breakup to outside scrutiny, or she hoped Matteo would stay out of it altogether. You think she suspected he was stirring the pot? I do not know what she suspected, but I dislike missing motivations. Wolfe tapped his finger lightly on the edge of his desk. She has a mind like a steel mold, sharp edges, exact lines. A person of that nature does not simply forget a volatile ex-employee when sabotage begins. Fair, I admitted. So what she knew and didn't tell us because she feared he'd take some of the blame? Or, Wolfe said slowly, because she feared she might. That hung in the air for a beat. You're suggesting Devlin helped trigger Paula's breakdown? Not deliberately, but people are not recipes, Archie. You cannot leave them on simmer indefinitely without consequence. Paula was overworked, undercredited, and, by her own admission, sidelined. Devlin knew that. She relied on it. She leaned on Paula's competence without ever acknowledging it publicly. I stood and crossed to the windows, watching the rain streak across the glass. You think that omission caused the sabotage? I think it fertilized it. Silence again, filled only by the tapping of water on the windowsill. Wolfe leaned back. It is no sin to underestimate a colleague, but it is dangerous, especially when the colleague is precise, emotionally undernourished, and exposed to a manipulator like Quinlan. I turned. You want to tell her that? No. He closed his eyes. But I want you to remember it. Always learning, even. After victory. That was Wolfe's great strength and maybe his curse. We let the subject drop. I filed the thank you note, not with the invoices, but inside the case folder, next to Saul's printouts and Quincy's statement. Paper proof that even a bakery war leaves casualties, and lessons. Around noon, Fritz appeared with lunch, grilled trout with dill cream, roasted fennel, and a rye roll that might have made Matteo weep. Wolfe barely acknowledged it before diving into the food with the solemn reverence of a monk cracking open scripture. As we ate, I asked, "So what happens to Paula now?" "She vanishes," Wolfe said. "That's her instinct. Disgraced precisionists do not linger. She'll find another position under a new name if necessary. She will be competent, silent, and vigilant for betrayal, real or imagined. And Quinlan? He will flame out. Artists with vendettas rarely sustain themselves. He may flourish briefly, but he will find no satisfaction in flour and fire. His war was never with Devlin, it was with himself. I buttered the roll. And Devlin? Wolfe paused, then said, "She will endure. She is harder than she looks." He chewed slowly. "But the next time sabotage strikes her door, she may hesitate less and trust more wisely." We finished lunch without further comment. That evening I got a call from Saul. "Just thought you'd like to know," he said. "Paula bought a bus ticket to Vermont. Paid in cash. No digital trail after that." "Starting over?" "Or hiding," he said. "But she's gone." And with that, the turnover twist unraveled to its final crumb. No murder. No blackmail. Letters. Just bruised egos, slow-baked resentment, and a quiet implosion inside a high-end kitchen. Wolfe would tell you that's enough. That betrayal is betrayal, whether it comes with blood or pastry cream. And I'd agree, especially now that Fritz was back to trusting the spice rack. The brownstone returned to its sacred rhythm, orchids upstairs, strategy downstairs, and me somewhere in between, pen in hand, waiting for the next knock, because there's always another twist in the oven, especially in New York. By the end of the week, the city had exhaled. The rain lifted, sunshine returned. Even the brownstone seemed to breathe easier, with Fritz humming in the kitchen again and the orchids basking in their regulated light upstairs. The turnover affair had officially cooled. But in Wolfe's world, cases don't always die with a bang. Sometimes they settle, soft as powdered sugar. I'd just finished updating the office log when the phone rang. Fritz picked it up in the kitchen, and moments later appeared with the serene gravity of a man bringing in the weather report or the end of the world. "A Mr. Quinlan," he said. "Wishes to speak with Mr. Wolfe." Wolfe made a face like someone had served him overcooked veal. "Tell him no." "Boss," I said, "might be worth it." "If he's calling you, there's a reason." Wolfe's lips compressed. "Very well, I'll endure it. Put him through." Fritz returned to the kitchen, and a moment later the line clicked open. Nero Wolfe speaking. There was a pause. Then Matteo Quinlan's voice, crisp as biscotti and twice as brittle. "Mr. Wolfe, I realize I may be your least favorite person at the moment, but I'm calling for a reason." "You're calling for absolution," Wolfe said flatly, "which I do not grant." "No," Matteo said. "I'm calling because Miss Devlin reached out to me. She wants to settle things. She offered me a consulting arrangement. Off the books, hush-hush, a recipe collaboration." Wolfe's brows rose half a centimeter. "Did she now?" "Yes. Said it was to honor the past, whatever that means. But I think it's guilt, or damage control, and frankly, it smells like manipulation." I looked over at Wolfe, whose expression didn't shift but whose fingers were now steepled. "She's playing a longer game than I thought," Matteo went on. "But if she's trying to keep me on a leash, it means she's still worried about what I might say or do." "Are you threatening her, Mr. Quinlan?" "No," he said quickly. "I'm re-evaluating. I thought you should know. Because if Devlin's trying to buy silence, it's not just me she's worried about. It's your investigation. She wants this whole thing buried, nicely, with a ribbon on top." Wolfe was silent for a moment. "Thank you," he said at last. "That is all." Matteo exhaled. "That's it?" "Yes," Wolfe replied and hung up. I blinked. "You believe him?" "No. But I believe his pride." And pride, Mr. Goodwin, is often a more consistent witness than memory. He rose, moving toward the dining room with the sort of deliberation normally reserved for court summons or escargot. "You intend to act on that call?" I asked. "No," he said, "but I intend to remember it." The weekend passed without further tremors. I paid a visit to Devlin's on Sunday morning, allegedly for coffee, but mostly to sniff the air. It was quieter than usual. Ricky ran the counter with the grim efficiency of a man who didn't trust milk foam, and Glenn seemed even more subdued, stacking croissants with military precision. Devlin wasn't there. A new sign read, "Manager on duty R. Darnell." I, too, didn't ask where she was. I already had a good guess. Back at the brownstone, I gave Wolfe my full report. "She's distancing," I said. "No public statement, just sliding into the background and letting the place run itself." As I predicted. But that doesn't explain the call from Mateo. Wolfe nodded. "It doesn't need to. Miss Devlin is not foolish enough to provoke scandal, nor vain enough to court redemption. She's simply managing perception, and that doesn't bother you?" Wolfe sipped his beer, then said, "No, because justice, Archie, is not synonymous with exposure. In this instance, discretion serves all parties." "That's awfully charitable." "No, it's pragmatic." He paused. "And Miss Devlin has suffered more than she admits. Paula's betrayal was not just strategic, it was personal, and that leaves a mark." I leaned back in my chair. "So we let it go?" "We file it," Wolfe said. "Under cases resolved without trial. The bakery survives. The saboteur retreats. The exiled truth-teller returns. That is as close to balance as one can hope for in the affairs of human beings." I nodded. "And if Mateo gets ambitious again, then I will not be charitable." Monday. Morning. The mail brought an anonymous package, no note, no sender address, just a single turnover inside a white pastry box. Apple, golden, slightly warm. No poison, no hidden razor blades, just a perfect fold of dough and filling. I stared. At it, Wolfe raised a brow. "From Miss Devlin? Maybe, or from Mateo, or a fan of our work. Is it safe?" I sniffed it. "Smells like repentance." He gestured toward the sideboard. "Set it aside. Fritz will dissect it before lunch." And that was that. The turnover twist, as we came to call it, was over. No arrests, no headlines, just a lesson in ego, neglect, and the perils of unsweetened ambition. Wolfe returned to his orchids. I returned to my desk. The brownstone resumed its sacred rhythm, and the city, blissfully unaware, kept on churning. But somewhere I knew a bakery's kitchen had become quieter, more alert, a little older, a little wiser, and far less generous with its cinnamon, just how Wolfe likes it. Tuesday started with rain again. Not the defiant downpour that shakes umbrellas out of people's hands, but the quieter kind, the kind that turns collars damp and gives the whole city a tired look. I was at my desk, sipping hot coffee and rereading Saul's notes on the Quinlan angle, more for the rhythm of routine than any real suspicion, when Wolfe made a noise. Not a grunt, not a sigh. Something between the two, but with an upward lilt. That meant something had occurred to him. I waited. He didn't speak. I gave it another 10 seconds, then prompted him. "You want to share the insight? Or do I guess until noon?" He looked up from the envelope he'd just slit open. It was a heavy piece of mail from the law firm of Kerr and Brecht, sealed with embossed initials. Wolfe turned the page slowly, then laid it flat on his desk. "Miss Devlin," he said, "has a will." "I'd hope so. A bakery empire like hers, who'd get custody of the cream cheese otherwise." "She's changed it," Wolfe said. "Filed with Kerr and Brecht yesterday. I am now listed as custodian of her business interest, should she become incapacitated or otherwise unable to make decisions, temporarily, of course." I blinked. "You're the bakery's emergency contact." "In essence." "That's either gratitude or the first move in a power transfer." "Neither," Wolfe said. "It's a shield, a symbolic one." I got up and took the paper from his desk, scanning the dense legal language. Wolfe was right. It wasn't a gift or an investment. It was a tactical maneuver. If anything were to go wrong, another health scare, another act of sabotage, the bakery's reins would momentarily fall to Wolfe, who had no interest in managing anything beyond his orchid room. "She's warding off something," I said, not planning for it. "Indeed," Wolfe said, "likely Matteo, or a partner he's courting. She's making herself legally unattractive as a target." "Smart," I admitted. "And paranoid," Wolfe added. "But then paranoia is just realism in a sharper coat." That afternoon, I received a call from Miss Devlin herself. "I assume Mr. Wolfe received the letter," she said without preamble. "He did. It was as subtle as powdered sugar on a black tablecloth. I needed a fail-safe," she said, "in case someone decides to strike again. Are you expecting trouble?" There was a pause. "No, but I've learned that silence doesn't mean safety, and I want to make sure this doesn't repeat itself." "Are you talking about Matteo?" "I'm talking about everyone," she said. "Clients, ex-employees, partners, staff. The world doesn't warn you when it's about to fall apart, Mr. Goodwin. It just waits until you look away." I made a note of that, then asked, "And what about Quincy?" "He started back yesterday. Part-time. No questions asked." "That's decent of you." "It's self-preservation," she replied. "He knew what was happening and still kept quiet. That kind of loyalty can't be trained, only repaid." I gave Wolfe the summary after dinner, which had been beef tenderloin. In Madeira reduction with shaved carrots and a potato cake so crisp, I was tempted to ask Fritz for lessons. Wolfe, for his part, was uncharacteristically mellow. He nodded along, sipped a thimble of port, and finally said, "Miss Devlin is rebuilding. She's doing it smartly." "She's doing it warily," Wolfe corrected, "which is not the same, but perhaps it is enough." He pushed back from the table and stood, joints creaking slightly, a rare reminder that even mountains have hinges. "You have one more task, Archie." I looked up. "What's that?" "Go back to the bakery, not as a detective, as a customer." "For real?" "Yes. Order something. Sit. Watch. I want to know if it feels different now, if the tension has lifted, or simply gone underground." Went the next morning, just as the rain gave way to pale sunlight and damp leaves. Devlin's looked brighter. The glass was spotless, the pastry case was full. There was a new girl behind the counter, smiling, fast, capable. Glenn was gone. Maybe he'd finally cracked under the pressure of symmetrical tart display. Ricky was still in the back, though I didn't see him. I ordered a cinnamon turnover, bold choice I know, and a black coffee and sat near the front. The place felt normal, not falsely cheerful, not grimly efficient, just steady. No more tremor beneath the surface, no Paula, no sabotage. Just people baking, eating, sipping, talking. When the turnover arrived, I broke it open and checked the layers. Golden, flaky, honest. I took a bite. It was perfect. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened with his eyes closed as I gave him the update. "And the turnover?" he asked. "A triumph," I said. "You'd hate it." "I never hate pastry. Only corruption." He opened his eyes. "Then the matter is finished." I paused. "Feels like it." He nodded. "That will be all, Archie." That evening, just before bedtime, Wolfe returned to the office and stood before his desk without sitting. "The saboteur is gone," he said, almost to himself. "The wounded recover, the foolish remain foolish, and the bakery survives." He picked up a paperweight from his desk, turned it once in his hand, then set it back down. "I would not have taken this case 10 years ago." "Why not?" "It lacks elegance, but it has truth." He looked at me. "And truth, even when coarse, must be protected." I nodded. "Well, boss, I'll take coarse truth over polished lies." "Spare me the slogans." He waved a hand. "Go to bed, the world is safe for now." I didn't argue. As I climbed the stairs, I thought about turnovers, sabotage, pride, and redemption, all of it baked into a week that started with flour and ended in reflection. And I thought, Wolfe was right. Truth doesn't always come wrapped in parchment. Sometimes it's sticky, unsightly, or comes in a cinnamon crust. But when you bite into it, you know. It was 2 days later when the phone rang, and Wolfe didn't flinch. That was how I knew the case was over. Not by any declaration or champagne cork, but by the silence. He didn't ask who it was. He didn't care. He had returned to his natural state, unmoved, unhurried, unreadable. I answered anyway. It was, "Saul, just checking in." Mateo had disappeared again, left his Queen's rental, taken down his site, no sign of a forwarding address. Wolfe gave a grunt that might have been approval. "Let the wind carry him," he said. "We are not the custodians of bitterness." It sounded like an epitaph, and it probably was. That afternoon, Fritz served poached salmon in dill aspic with chilled fennel salad, and Wolfe devoured it with the satisfaction of a man whose inner ecosystem had been restored. The brownstone was clean again. The world beyond its doors could remain grimy. He was no reformer, but inside, order reigned. "Archie," he said after the meal, "you've made your notes. Filed, logged, archived and alphabetized. Do you want the case summary?" He waved it away. "I have it." Which meant, of course, he had it catalogued in that cathedral of a mind where wrongdoing was arranged like orchids, precisely classified and culled. "You're still thinking about Devlin," I said. He glanced at me. "Naturally. She intrigues. Schmickchen, because she's competent, because she survived." He stood slowly and walked to the globe near the bookcase. He didn't open it, just placed a hand on it like a chess master resting after checkmate. "She saw too much and said too little," Wolfe went on. "A common sin, but rare is the sinner who learns from it." "You think she has?" "I think she will." We stood in silence for a beat, letting the story settle around us like cooling pastry. No applause, no medals, just clarity. Outside, the sky was beginning to clear. A beam of late-day sunlight cut across the parquet floor like a bookmark left in the middle of a chapter. I said, "Not a bad case." "No," Wolfe agreed. "Not bad." "Would you take another one like it?" He raised a brow. "Would you?" I grinned. "If the pastries are good, I'll consider it." He almost smiled, then he turned to the office door. "You may have the evening free, provided you don't waste it." Define waste. But he was already gone. And so the brownstone resumed its rhythm, orchids upstairs, silence downstairs, and Fritz in the kitchen assembling whatever tomorrow's truth required. As for me, I poured a glass of beer, leaned back in my chair, and wrote the final line in the log, client satisfied, culprit exposed, motives buried, not vanished, case closed, cinnamon optional.f.